Hello, and welcome to CyberBible 2.0, the online Bible study of Union United Methodist Church in Quincy, Illinois. I'm Bob Morwell, the pastor, and we take up our study with the conclusion of Mary's speech known as the Magnificat, which is found in chapter 1 of Luke's Gospel. We start this episode at verse 56. Mary stays with her relative Elizabeth for 3 months and then returns to Nazareth. Elizabeth goes on to give birth to the child who will become John the Baptist, the forerunner of the Messiah. John's father, Zechariah, has been rendered mute throughout her pregnancy for expressing skepticism about the news he gets in a vision of the angel Gabriel that he and Elizabeth are to have this child so late in life and that he will grow up to become a great prophet. The day comes for the baby to be circumcised. It's during this ceremony that he officially receives his name. Elizabeth announces that his name is to be John, Yohanan in Hebrew. Because this was not a name common to their family, Zechariah's relatives ask if this is correct. And at that moment he speaks for the first time in months, simply saying, his name is John. Luke says the people are astounded and wonder what kind of child this boy will grow up to be after such extraordinary events. The speech which Zechariah then utters, like Mary's earlier one, was likely a hymn of the early church. He praises God for remembering the oppressed people of Israel and proclaims this child's birth and subsequent life to be examples of God honoring the covenant first made with Abraham to preserve Israel and bring blessing to the world. He focuses on John's task to be the forerunner of the promised Messiah. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for he will go before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, and to guide our feet in the path of peace. With that, Zechariah and Elizabeth fade from the scene. And we're told that John grows up strong in the Spirit and goes on to live in the wilderness. He may have spent part of those years among a monastic group known as the Essenes. The Essenes lived lives of celibacy and rigorous spiritual discipline. They emphasized spiritual and ritual purity and believed that the religious establishment based in the temple in Jerusalem had become hopelessly corrupt. Consequently, they tended to separate themselves from the larger society. It's believed that the Qumran commune, situated next to the Dead Sea, was an Essene monastery, and that it was the Essenes who produced and preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. Many Essenes believed that the end of the world was imminent and would be preceded by the arrival of the Messiah and then a decisive battle between the forces of light and darkness. As part of the preparation, they engaged in frequent ritual baths known as mikvahs, which were seen as outward manifestations of an inward spiritual cleansing. John may have been influenced by the Essenes, adapting the frequent ritual baths they practiced into a single purifying ritual which we know as baptism. We cannot know for certain if this is what happened, but it does seem plausible. Both John and Jesus would build upon religious movements of their time. Both would then take those movements in new directions, as we will see. As we enter chapter 2 of Luke, we get into the story of Jesus' birth. Now, if you had only Matthew's account to go on, you would assume that Joseph and Mary lived in Bethlehem to begin with, and that they had their child at home. There is no mention in Matthew's account of a census or a forced trip to Bethlehem far to the south of Nazareth. There is no mention of a stable, or manger, or angels, or shepherds. Luke, on the other hand, makes no mention of a star, or wise men, or the brutal actions of the power-mad King Herod, which forced the family to become refugees in Egypt and later to settle in Nazareth because it was outside the boundaries of Herod's kingdom. Luke writes that the reason Mary and Joseph were forced to go to Bethlehem at such an inconvenient time was because the Romans were conducting a census, and every person, or at least every male, was to return to their hometown to register. The implication here is that Joseph was originally from Bethlehem because that was the hometown of his ancestor King David. Luke says this all happened while a Roman official named Quirinius was governor of Syria, but records from that era indicate that Quirinius did not become governor until 6 or 7 A.D. Meanwhile, Matthew claims that Herod the Great was still alive when Jesus was born, and he died in 4 BC, a full decade earlier. Both events could not have happened at the same time. Frankly, there's not much to be gained from trying to determine which account is more or less historically accurate. There's no way to know that, which may be why none of the other New Testament writers go there. The purpose of these stories is to illustrate basic themes which will run throughout the Gospels. Matthew casts Jesus as a new Moses. As such, he shows Jesus having to escape the genocidal designs of a brutal tyrant, just as the baby Moses did. And the truth is that Jesus did face murderous opposition from tyrannical powers. Luke stresses how God uses someone whom the world regards as poor, unimportant, and rejected to bring the good news of God's saving and transforming grace. And the truth is that Jesus was precisely such a character. Now, skeptics will say that these inconsistencies somehow prove that the entire gospel is a fabrication, and some will even claim that Jesus himself never existed. But history is filled with heroes and even villains who most certainly existed, but around whom legends have arisen that are part historical fact and part myth based on those facts. Often it is difficult, if not impossible, to separate the two. There will always be naysayers concerning Jesus' existence. Today we even have nut jobs who claim the moon landings didn't happen. Buzz Aldrin even punched one of them out one time when the guy called him a liar and shoved a Bible in his face, demanding that he swear on it that he had landed on the moon. The die-hard skeptics insist this proves Aldrin didn't land, because otherwise he would have sworn on the Bible. There is no way for us to know for certain what parts of Luke's or Matthew's accounts are historically accurate. Those who insist that they are both completely literally true choose to ignore the historical inconsistencies. Those who take a less literal approach will have to look for the common themes which are reflected in his later life. And skeptics can pooh-pooh the whole thing, but then they have to explain how such an unlikely or even totally mythical character could have such a pivotal role in human history. Next week, we get to the angels, the shepherds, that stable in Bethlehem, and why they are all so important to Luke and to us. I'm Bob Morwell, pastor of Union United Methodist Church in Quincy, Illinois. And I invite you to join us in cyberspace and in the real world. You're welcome in both. And remember, you are welcome to post your questions and your comments here as well. This is intended to be an interactive Bible study. Peace.